Hey everyone, today we're going to dive into something called symbolic logic. Now I know it might sound a little intense, but trust me, it's basically a superpower. It's a tool for sharpening your thinking and building absolutely rock-solid arguments. So let's get right into it. I mean, think about it. We face this question every single day, right? Whether you're listening to the news, debating with a friend, or just scrolling through social media, how do you actually cut through all the noise and see the real structure of what someone is saying? Well, that is precisely the problem symbolic logic was built to solve. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute basics, the building blocks. Then we'll learn how to connect them, and after that, we'll put our creations to the test. And finally, we'll use all these new skills to build and, more importantly, take apart arguments. It's going to give you a whole new toolkit for clear thinking. Okay, first things first. Before we can really get into symbolic logic, we kind of need to be on the same page about what logic itself even is. Let's nail down a clear definition.
And really, that's it. At its core, logic isn't about feelings or opinions or who's yelling the loudest. It's just the blueprint. It's the set of rules we use to see if the path from a starting point to a conclusion is actually structurally sound. You know, to build anything, a house, a car, anything, you have to start with the smallest, most basic parts. Well, in logic, those fundamental building blocks are called statements.
And this right here is the absolute key. A statement has to be something you can slap a label on, either true or false. For example, the sky is green is a statement. It's false, but it's a statement. But something like, man, what a beautiful day, is not a statement. That's an opinion. In logic, there's just no room for maybes. It's one or the other.
This core idea actually has a pretty cool name, the law of the excluded middle. It just means there's no gray area, no kinda true, no middle ground. In the world of pure logic, every single statement has to have a clear truth value. It's either true or it's false, period.
So to focus on an argument's structure without getting totally bogged down by the words, we use symbols. It's so much easier. For instance, we can just let the letter P stand for the whole sentence, the sun is a star, which, is true, and we can let Q stand for the moon is made of chocolate, which is false. This just boils everything down to its logical essence.
Okay, so we've got our building blocks, our statements, P and Q, but now we need the mortar, right? The stuff that sticks them together so we can build something more interesting. These are our logical connectors. We're going to focus on the big three. First, you've got and. This one's really strict. Both parts have to be true. Then there's or, which is way more chill. As long as at least one part is true, you're good. And then there's the super important if-then connector, which sets up a kind of promise or a condition.
So, we have statements, and we have ways to connect them. But how do we figure out if the new, longer sentence we just built is true or false? For that, we use this amazing tool called a truth table. Think of it like a stress test for our logical sentences.
All right, let's start with and, which is technically called a conjunction. The rule here is dead simple. For an and statement to be true, both of the individual pieces have to be true. There are no exceptions. And this truth table just lays it all out perfectly. Check out that first row. P is true, Q is true, so the combined statement P and Q is true. Simple. But in every other scenario, if P is false or Q is false or both are false, the whole thing comes crashing down. It's a really high bar to clear.
Now let's switch gears and look at the or connector, or disjunction. This one is so much more forgiving than and. For an or statement to be true, you just need one of the parts to be true. That's it.
And you can see it right here in its truth table. P or Q is true if P is true, it's true if Q is true, and it's even true if they're both true. The only way for an or statement to be false is if both parts are false. See? Much easier to satisfy.
Okay, now for the conditional, if, then. This one can feel a little weird at first, not gonna lie. But there's a perfect little story that makes it all click into place. Just think of it as a promise. Let's break this down with a teacher analogy. The promise is, if you study hard, then I'll give you a gift. Okay, scenario 1, you study hard. True. And the teacher gives a gift? True. Promise kept. Now scenario 2, you study hard. True. But the teacher does not give you a gift? False. Uh-oh, promise broken. That is the one and only way for this if-then statement to be false. Now here's the cool part. What if you don't study hard? The if part is false. Well, the promise was never triggered in the first place. The teacher can still give you a gift or not. Either way, they didn't break their original promise. And that's why a false starting point can never ever lead to a broken logical promise.
All right, We have all of our pieces on the board, we've got statements, we've got connectors, and we've got truth tables to test them, so now it's time for the main event, putting it all together into a full argument and seeing if it actually holds up under pressure.
This right here is our gold standard. This is what we're aiming for. For an argument to be officially valid, it means that if you accept all of the starting points, the premises, as true, then the conclusion has to be true. It's impossible for it to be anything else.
So, how do we test this? Easy. We build a big truth table for the entire argument. Then we scan down the rows and look for what's called the critical row. That's any row where all of our starting premises, our hypotheses, happen to be true at the same time. This is where the argument lives or dies.
And here it is, the moment of truth. In this specific test, we found a critical row, a row where both of our hypotheses came out true. But then, look what happened to the conclusion in that exact same row. It's false. This is the smoking gun. This tells us we have a situation where our true starting points lead to a false conclusion. The logical bridge collapsed. This argument is officially invalid.
What's so cool about this is that once you know what a valid argument is supposed to look like, you start to spot the fakes everywhere. And these fakes have a name. They're called fallacies. They're arguments that sound really persuasive on the surface, but they have a fatal flaw baked right into their structure.
Let's look at a super common one, the converse error. The valid argument on the left is perfect. It says, if it's raining, then the ground is wet. It is raining, therefore the ground is wet. Flawless logic. But the fallacy on the right tries to flip it. It says, if it's raining, then the ground is wet. The ground is wet, therefore it must be raining. Wait a minute, no, that's a bad conclusion. The ground could be wet because my sprinkler is on. See, the argument structure is completely broken.
So in the end, symbolic logic is like giving yourself a pair of X-ray glasses. It lets you see the hidden skeleton of any argument. It completely strips away all the emotional, persuasive language and just lets you check the structural integrity. So the question I want to leave you with is this. Now that you have these tools, how many of the arguments you hear every day are actually built to last? And how many are just waiting to crumble under a little bit of inspection?